With Generation 9 releasing in November, the hype has already begun to build around the newly announced titles of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And with more information dropping on the games at any moment, I figured now would be a good time to talk about my hopes going into next gen. Take a look back at the last main series game, Sword and Shield, and talk about some changes that I'd like to see moving forward. First and foremost, my major hope is that Generation 9 is a completed game at launch. I actually think Sword and Shield were great. The region design was pretty, the new Pokemon were good, but the game was just not finished at launch. There wasn't enough content there, not enough meat on the bones. To be fair, I think the DLC completely fixed that issue. The only problem was, well, it was DLC. It shouldn't have had to rely on the extra content not included in the base games to feel like a fully fledged Pokemon game. Now, there is a post-game included without the DLC, however, it's abysmally short, and to put it nicely, not very interesting. Honestly, this could lead into a whole other discussion about whether or not having DLC in Pokemon games is good. But regardless of whether or not you think it's good, I think it's safe to say that it's here to stay. So I definitely think there will be DLC for Scarlet and Violet. On that note, however, both the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra were phenomenal, and I hope they do something similar for the post-game in Scarlet and Violet. Just before you make me pull out my wallet again, give the players a full Pokemon experience that they paid for. And don't just lock the post-game behind a paywall, especially with a $60 price tag. I'm not necessarily saying that every game has to have a huge post-game, but the way I think about it is, the more post-game there is, the more game there is. The more game there is, the more fun you can have and memories you can make. At least for me personally, the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra took Sword and Shield from good to great, and having a full post-game at launch would make any potential DLC even better. Speaking of the DLC, both the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra vastly improved on the wild area. I said before that the wild area in Sword and Shield was like the testing ground for Legends Arceus Overworld. And if you look at the wild area in the main game and compare it to the post-game areas, I believe you can already start to see an improvement. It's definitely a case where both players and developers got more used to the idea. It was less jarring for players, and Game Freak got some experience in creating those kinds of 3D environments. Then, as we can see for the trailer for Scarlet and Violet, they actually seem to be leaning into it even more, possibly expanding the wild area concept to the whole overworld, almost like Legends Arceus. And I'm really hoping this is the case. I think the wild area was definitely Game Freak's most fruitful idea of Generation 8. And while it is a very good one, there are a lot of small things that could be improved moving into next gen. Things like Pokemon popping in too close, the jarring weather moving from one zone to another, and the general PS2 look of it all. Some of these things were slightly improved with PLA. The pop-in was a little better, and the weather was definitely an improvement. However, it still suffered from a lot of the same issues. My hope is that they actually combine stuff from both games, like catching Pokemon outside of battle, visible overworld shinies, and the encounter startup time. Mix this with the more familiar format of battling and progressing, and I think you'd have the perfect system. I really thought the wild area was a great idea, and with some extra iteration from Legends Arceus, I think a little more time in the oven would do wonders. Gimmicks in Pokemon games aren't necessarily a bad thing. I think many fans were kind of burnt by Z-Crystals and Dynamax. Z-Crystals definitely have their merits, and there were some cool ones too, but ultimately it was just kind of the same attack but a little bit stronger. Dynamax is definitely not a fan favorite, though I think Gigantamax is an exception. Seeing the new forms generates a similar level of hype to Mega Evolutions, which is my personal favorite gimmick. I know Megas were competitively problematic, but me and many other fans like them way more than just big Pokemon. The downside to Megas was for an average player that not every Pokemon got to use one, unlike Z-Crystals or Dynamax. And while I do understand this concern, I think we kind of already solved this issue with a limited Pokedex. If we're not going to include every Pokemon, then why not go for a gimmick that only a handful of Pokemon can use? Game Freak is already handpicking which Pokemon get included alongside the new ones for the sake of balancing and type variety. If there's going to be this much control over which Pokemon get in and which Pokemon don't, then why not use the gimmick as a way to show special love and attention towards particular Pokemon? Of course, there's always going to be the popular Pokemon that get favored, like Charizard and Gengar, but I think that things like Mega Evolutions or even Gigantamax work best for Pokemon that haven't seen as much attention over the years. So my hope is that the main gimmick goes back to being more Pokemon specific. But what would that gimmick be exactly? Well, I think it could easily be worked into what's already been established as the main theme for Generation 9, past and future. Like, what if a Pokemon could hold an item like a Mega Stone, and with that, they're able to transform into the past or future versions of that Pokemon. The designs I'm showing on screen are illustrations of Pokemon that I think would work well with this idea. And if you're interested in that art, I'll have the artist on screen alongside their design, so you can go follow them on Instagram. These past and future forms would not only be something for fans to get excited over, but could also be a chance to get into the lore of certain Pokemon. And I'm not just talking about their past forms either. Seeing how Pokemon will progress into the future could do a lot to talk about the current state of the Pokemon world and where it's headed, dropping hints or suggestions for how the series may progress in the future. But how do we fix that pesky competitive problem that I mentioned before? Well, the real issue with Mega Evolutions in competitive play is that once you have a Pokemon set up, all you'd have to do is hit the Mega button and sweep the enemy team. So I think it could easily be fixed by applying a simple time limit to the transformation, kind of like Dynamax and Gigantamax before it. That way, timing your transformation requires a little more skillful decision making than just hitting the button and ending the game. There's plenty of great ideas that can go into the next generation to make the next game more engaging and interesting for all players. And these are just some of mine, but what do you think about Generation 8 and where it went wrong? And how could Generation 9 fix it? Leave a comment and let me know down below. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and thank you all again for watching. I'll see you all next time. Peace.